The Port of Darwin is extremely important, and China practically owns it. It serves as Australia's northern gateway for trade with Asia. Australia and the US both use it to project power against China. But how can you project power if the port you use is owned by your principal adversary for 99 years? That's right, the next time the port will be in Australian hands, the year will be 2114. While the deal was made in 2015, the intrigue still lives on, especially because of the controversy surrounding it. We'll investigate this deal and why Australia might be getting it back much sooner than the next century. If you could do me a favor and like and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. My goal is to get to 1,000 subscribers, and your support would help me reach it. The Leased of Darwin port has its roots in 2012, when the Northern Territory of Australia was governed by the country Liberal Party. The NT government thought of the port as vital to its future economic success, but that infrastructure was in a state of disrepair and needed investments from the federal government. For years, the NT government lobbied the Commonwealth for millions in investment, but the Commonwealth showed limited interest. The port at the time led to only a few million annually. The NT government, however, was sure that it was the answer to the territory's economic future. So it looked elsewhere, and it found 33 entities that showed interest. A committee was then formed that would oversee this entire process and ultimately select the winner. That winner would end up being Landbridge Industry Australia, a subsidiary of Shandong Landbridge Group. Australia retained sovereignty and security powers, but the deal sparked enduring national security concerns. Its owner was billionaire Ye Cheng. According to the Australian media, he had been named by the Chinese government in 2013 as one of the top 10 individuals carrying out the development of national defense. His company also reportedly has deep ties to the Chinese Communist Party and also the People's Liberation Army. The NT government had refused to release some of the details of the lease, citing confidentiality issues, but we do have some details, and they don't paint a pretty picture. According to Adam Giles, the chief minister of the Northern Territory at the time, the $506 million deal was the highest bid, but according to some of those who worked the deal, two other bids, Australian and European, were also close to that number. This makes the final deal even worse. Why would the Northern Territory choose a Chinese company if there were similar offers from companies with much less strategic risk? It's common sense to choose the second best deal or even the third best deal, but the Northern Territory wanted to maximize profits. But it still doesn't make any sense. You don't risk Australia's security over 99 years to save some money in the short term. So how did this happen? And why in the world did the federal government allow this to happen? To understand why this deal transpired, we have to grasp just how different the world was back in 2015. The geopolitical landscape was very different. In fact, the years 2014 and 2015 were regarded as a high point in Australia-China relations. In 2014, the two nations had agreed to a free trade deal. President Xi Jinping even addressed the Australian Parliament. There was an ambitious and optimistic view during that time on Australia's relationship with China. People believed that the rise of China would not be accompanied by any national security pressures. Australians were enjoying the fruits of China's economic miracle, but it would take only 2 years for that unguarded optimism to subside. 2017 was the year the Australia-China relationship fundamentally changed. It was known as Australia's China Reset. The CCP's increasing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific set off alarm bells in Canberra. Suddenly, national security considerations replaced a long-held belief in neoliberalism, and this began a chain of events, which would eventually lead to an increase in Australian participation in the Indo-Pacific, deepening ties with countries such as New Zealand, the Philippines, Malaysia, and beyond. Alliances old and new would institutionalize the defense of a free and open Indo-Pacific, particularly in the South China Sea, a critical choke point for world trade. But while the Northern Territory government allowed this deal, why didn't the federal government intervene to stop it? Well, a decades-old law, the Foreign Acquisitions and Takeovers Act of 1975, only requires the FIRB approval for these types of deals. The Port of Darwin was owned by the Northern Territory government and was leased to the Landbridge Group, which is technically a private company, not a foreign government entity. Because of this exemption, the Federal Review Board didn't have to sign off. It basically slipped through the cracks, a loophole later closed by new laws. Since it was technically a lease and not a sale, it bypassed any legal hurdles. Additionally, Australia's Department of Defense assessed the Port of Darwin lease and did not raise any formal objections. The Defense Department looked at if the lease would lead to any interference, especially between the proximity to Larakaia Defense Precinct and its use by the US Marines. Defense concluded that the lease would not impede Australian Defense Forces' access to the port. Remember the context of this time period, the strategic climate was vastly different. This helps to explain why this deal went through. But it didn't take long for these outdated laws to start changing. Already in 2016, the FATA was amended to require the FIRB to review sales or leases of critical infrastructure assets by any level of government to any foreign investor. If the deal had happened after the law passed, it would have required federal approval. In 2018, the Port of Darwin was classified as critical infrastructure and put on a register. This gave the government some security oversight over the port. In 2021, those powers were broadly expanded to the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act. It gives the Commonwealth broad powers to review existing arrangements and block new deals. This was the first time the government could legally cancel the Darwin lease without relying on state or territory consent. While the Morrison government did trigger a formal review of the lease, they announced the lease will remain as it didn't pose a sufficient national security risk. Morrison said the situation would still be monitored, and they still have the power to act in the future if need be. But after all these years, this port may finally be coming back into the hands of Australia. In April of this year, Anthony Albanese, Prime Minister of Australia, announced that his government is looking for a private buyer to end the lease. He said he wants it to be in Australian hands. Defense Minister Richard Marles refused to say whether President Trump pressured Australia to end the lease. In the era of great power competition, Australia is firmly aligned with the West. The Americans use Darwin as a strategic location to rotate thousands of Marines each year, and they are on the record stating their concerns over Chinese agents spying on American and Australian Navy ships. Perhaps there isn't a better explanation than this for the absurdity of this lease. It was when Jody Ryan, someone on the committee that selected the Chinese company, was asked about where that $506 million had gone. She replied that it was put into general revenue and was spent. That money is now long gone. What remains is the 89 years left on that lease. Was it truly worth it? What do you think of the Port of Darwin? Should it return to Australia? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and check out these videos next. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again.